So it's a pleasure to have you, the three of you, online today with us. Kolektiv Cité Radieuse, the host of this conversation, is a curatorial group based at housing unit in Marseille. We have been existing since 2012, and we have been curating exhibition, residences, publications, and editorial projects with a number of designers and artists interested in the impact of 20th century architecture in design and visual art. And it's as part of this practice that we came across the work of Corinne and Julia, I think a couple of years ago. And we noticed their genuinely original approach to architecture as a social phenomenon, I would say, and their specific interest in the role of play in relation to built things. And we thought that this was exactly the type of practices we were interested in with regard to interpreting modernist and 20th century architecture at large to a wider audience beyond the circle of specialists. And we were especially obviously thrilled by their ongoing project at the time, Growing Up Modern, that was still going on and that had at that moment still not taken the shape of a book, of the book which exists today, which has been recently released. So we get in touch with the two of you with things in mind, and here we are today. A pleasure again, and also for us a milestone in a collaboration in the making that is being built around this book and this project in the form of several upcoming exhibitions in different formats to be presented over 2021 and 2022 in some of the places featuring in this volume that I really recommend to all the attendees today. So I won't take much more time for this introduction. I will just tell that Corinne and Julia are architects by training, but that interestingly on their website profile, they do introduce themselves as artists, designers, and educators, and the word architect does not feature at first. So it tells something. So it tells about the multidisciplinary character of their practice, and it is precisely what I would like you to introduce first, to tell us about first the nature of your practice, the different layers that it has, so that we better understand where this volume, where this book, and the project that give birth to this book position itself in this broader practice. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, we'll do that, and we'll also share some slides. Maybe just to start, a thank you to Maxime. Thank you for having us. And maybe just a clarification, the reason why we don't say we're architects is because in North America, we're actually not allowed to, because we're not licensed. So
that's a good reason as well.
Even though we do have our education, we don't have our licenses here at the time. But thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you for spending your evening or afternoon or wherever you are. It's lunchtime here in Buffalo where we are. We just wanted to start and share the kind of three categories that we do work in. Over time, we've named because we work in different media and at different scales and with different preoccupations, we've kind of come to categorize some of the work that we do into these three categories: social infrastructures, domestic narratives, and expanded preservation. And I think in different ways, they all tie our interests in art and in architecture and space in narrative.
Yeah, so just to give you the briefest of overviews of some of the other work we do before we speak mostly today about the book that Maxime generously introduced. what the first category would be our work that falls under what we call social infrastructures. And this can take a lot of forms. It could be a temporary event, but it's trying to make interventions in public space that bring people together to have a shared physical experience sort of in real life. So that could be a temporary event, a more permanent public artwork, or a sculpture.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that you're seeing the slides changing as we're doing this. No, you're not.
No?
Okay.
Okay.
So
Actually, they are not changing. So maybe you can just resume this.
just 1 second. Let's do that again. This is the trouble with.
Yeah, it often happens.
So you
Is
see
that
this
working
one
now?
now? So this
Yes, it's better. Actually, it's looking better.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's good.
Yeah, so this is what I was trying to explain. It could be a temporary event, such as this installation, or a more permanent public artwork, such as this, or a sculpture. And we've also tried to introduce it into more traditional architectural designs, like this interior for a cafe.
Our second category of projects are called domestic narratives. And with these projects, we think about the use of space over time. And we try to work through narratives to try to understand both the desires of people and how they might want to use space, but also for ourselves to kind of project certain narratives and try to play through scenarios of how to add to the domestic spaces in order for them to be more memorable, more playful, more specific. So just one example of a project here, this is a house we designed in Canada, a holiday home. And it's not our holiday home, we're in the photos, but it's not our house. But it's a space that we designed obviously for with clients who had desires and needs relating to the site and materiality and program. But what we really wanted to consider with this house in particular was the use and the youngest client in our view, so the daughter of the family, and how she would experience the home, how she would find moments within it that might become important to her. So things like the access ramp, which you can see in the photo here, we made very kind of colorful and specific in a way to remind her of the arrival into this holiday home, to mimic the kind of experience of being on a dock, and certain other elements within the house that really try to be memorable and be specific. And then I guess the third category, and here we're gonna, the Growing Up Modern project is the major recent work in this category, but these projects take on various forms, from installations to photographic projects to other media as well. And here we're trying to kind of question and explore an expanded idea of preservation. So what does it mean to preserve or conserve architectural and urban space? And how can that include narratives, personal experiences, and things like that? And obviously the link there is to very clearly made to the Growing Up Modern project. So I think we'll end there as an answer to your question.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, before I move we move to the content of the book itself and the context in which it emerged. Actually, I have just a little probe with regard to what you just presented. This focus also in other aspect of your practice in the youngest users of the house. Where does it come from originally? Is it a part of childhood in yourself, or where is it some because you believe that those are usually forgotten or because they are important pieces in the successful rollout of an architectural project when it's meant to be a home?
I think it's both. I think there's an aspect of children are such a large part of our population, but yet very often they are not talked about. when it comes to urban design and the design of houses. And maybe because they don't have a voice, right? And so I think partially thinking of children, maybe because we recently had a child close to when a lot of these projects started, maybe because, thinking of play necessarily makes people think about children, even though play isn't just about children, but somehow that has both of those things, both on a personal level and on a kind of humanistic level, have shifted our focus towards children. And I think thinking of children makes us think of everyone else in a slightly different way.
Yeah, because I think design has been preoccupied for at least maybe 100 years now with focusing on some sort of idealized average person and designing for that. And now in the last, I'd say 20 years, there's a shift and people are designing rather for the extremes and understanding that if you design for somebody who doesn't have full abilities and for somebody who has some other condition, you end up catching that average person in between and accommodating them. And so I think on some level also our interest in designing for children is a way of like designing for an extreme of the kind of normal range that people look at, and then it will catch everyone else. Everyone else can still use the thing that's designed for a child, but maybe it prompts gets us to think of a different response than if we picture adults.
As you are both professors, you are also teaching. There is also an academic part to your work in which you dig in, you investigate the role of, in particular, the role of play, but also the importance of alternative form of interpretation of architecture, which is interesting and which is both aspects being present and being the two backbones, I would say, of growing up modern, which is about childhood in iconic homes, but which is also about oral history and personal recollection and relationship to a built environment and to architecture at large. So how do you, which position occupies this particular project, this work that led to the book in your practice, and how it emerged, where it originates, basically?
I mean, I think the project started with a very ordinary experience in a way, maybe unordinary to us. We were visiting the Villa Savoie on the outskirts of Paris by Le Corbusier. And we were, as architecture tourists tend to do, going to visit famous buildings. And but what we were struck by in that visit was obviously the building, but more than that, there was a series of display cases. I believe it was in the kitchen of the villa, that contained letters from Madame Savoie, the client, to the architect. And in those letters, she described various things, including, what she wanted in the house, but there were also letters after the building had been constructed. And these letters included things, lots of complaints, but also among those was the complaint that her son had gotten pneumonia from the building itself, so that the building was leaking and therefore had caused him pneumonia. And we were very intrigued by this because it made us really think about, okay, well, what, we know how we were taught about these famous buildings in architecture school, but what do the children who lived in these buildings remember? And how did the son remember getting pneumonia from the building? What was the kind of relationship between specifically the kids and those buildings? And that was the kind of starting point for this project. I
think despite Madame Savoie complaining about the building, we had the idea that as she commissioned it, on some level, if you spend that much money on a house, you're going to love it, almost no matter what, probably, or you're really committed to the ideology behind it. And we would say, in America, we'd say you drank the Kool-Aid. But we kind of supposed that the kids would offer maybe a more honest or more raw opinion of the architecture because they didn't choose it. It was chosen for them. And so we thought it would be interesting specifically to ask the kids who grew up in these kind of houses or housing projects about their experience, because they might have a more raw opinion than their parents.
Mhm. And specifically, we were very interested in the first children. So not when the buildings became famous or were documented, but when they were the kind of original buildings, and we know, you know, how extreme modernism was, right? When it first appeared, how different these buildings must have looked. And so we were specifically curious to learn from the first children. And so that was the beginning of the study. We then tried to get in touch with a number of people, and this we were able to do through both kind of personal research on our part, but also reaching out to a number of institutions and the foundations and museums who were instrumental in the end with connecting us with certain individuals who had these experiences of growing up, and that's how we were able to have a host of conversations, which have then led to the book. So we were actually able to correspond with the grandson of the Savoie family, and we learned that his father was actually in his 20s. So what we had imagined as this little child running around the Villa Savoie was actually not a little child anymore. And there's a recent publication also from Burghauser as well that brings together some of these family recollections from that building. But so that for us was, that was the beginning of the project.
And also the process, how you did approach people, and what was the perspective you adopted. Maybe we can move to a little bit to the content of the book, which is structured around four long chapters addressing both the specificities and characteristics of the building, but built around testimonies and personal recollection of four people, two men and two women. It is also ordered by a chronological order of the construction of these different houses, starting with a house in the Weissenhof Siedlung in Stuttgart from 1927 up to the housing unit that was inaugurated in 1952 in Marseille. So yes, if you want to share about.
Just one thing we want also to add is there was a kind of a pairing of information for us. We wanted to speak to the people, and then we wanted to be able to visit the buildings and to be able to photograph them. And so that necessarily kind of created a set of constraints, both in terms of finding the people, making sure that they were willing to talk to us, but also making sure that the building was still around and was able to be a place that we could visit and have a look ourselves. And so that the pairing of those two constraints also led us to the kind of selection of the stories that we were able to tell. But let me jump in to maybe sharing some slides about the book itself. So yeah, the book was released, it's in English and it's also in German. So we we were able to get in touch with 4 different individuals whose stories we were able to include in the book. We actually spoke with a few more people, but they, for different reasons, didn't fit the criteria that we had set out of both being able to have the conversation and being able to visit the building. But we were very grateful for Mr. Fassbender, Mr. Tugendhat, Mrs. Sumpfer, and Ms. Moreau, who shared with us the memories that they had of growing up in these very iconic houses and housing projects. And we had lots of questions. So one of the things we did is we came with a very long list of questions. This is just a very small sample of them, but we wanted in this way we were quite methodical. We tried to ask all of our interlocutors the same questions, trying to learn about their memories, trying to understand the impact that they thought maybe growing up in the settings that they did had on them, and a whole host of other questions. And I think we also want to just say that the book has come about because of we were able to have all these conversations, but there was also a lot of support that we got from various people, and I'm just going to list some of the help we got. So we got support from the New York State Council of the Arts, support from Elise Jaffe and Jeffrey Brown, as well as the Architecture League of New York, support from the MIT School of Architecture and Planning, and the University at Buffalo Humanities Institute. And then of course, Ria Stein and her team at Berkhauser, who were instrumental in making this a publication. And then all of the foundations and museums, including the Le Corbusier Foundation and the Weissenhof Museum, and others who shared the information and shared archival documents and things like that with us. And in many cases were the institutions that allowed us to make contact with the individuals we spoke with, like I mentioned previously. So the book itself has an introduction, obviously, and here we make the case for oral history as a form of architectural preservation. So we make the case that that recording and sharing the stories of inhabitation is as important as preserving the buildings themselves, and that these stories, the stories of the people who lived in the buildings, need to be recorded and need to be shared as much as the stories of the architects or others who, you know, contributed to the making of the buildings themselves.
The book is structured, as Maxime said, around the 4 chapters of the 4 houses that we looked at, with an introduction and a conclusion. And then each chapter is structured first with a kind of objective history or a very brief overview of kind of the main facts and data about the building and how it came about. And then moves on to the conversation that we had with the person who as a child grew up in the home. So the sort of their subjective history of the house. And then that includes also annotated drawings where we try to locate the memories that they share with us with the kind of the physical plan or space of the building. And then each of those chapters ends with a contemporary photo essay. So when we went then, as Julia mentioned, to the building ourselves, we had already had the conversation with the person that grew up there. And so we tried to take photographs of the building from somehow the point of view of that child that grew up there, as our way of trying to contribute something new to these buildings, which were already kind of very well documented. There's many photos existing of all of these buildings. So that's what we tried to bring to them.
So, so like Maxime mentioned, there are 4 chapters, and we'll just give you a little bit of a taste of each of them. So the first chapter is focused on the Weissenhof estate and the row house by Aude. It is told based on the conversation that we had with Mr. Rolf Fassbender. And some of the things that really stuck out to us from that conversation was the emphasis on the kind of, not just the row house itself, but the emphasis on the neighborhood and the spaces, the outdoor spaces of the row house that were very prominent in Mr. Fassbender's recollections. So the street outside, which he called his playground. This is just around the corner from the row houses, and this is the spot where they would count when they were playing hide and seek. So the short wall, retaining wall on the right here was the counting spot. The garden on the south side of the row house. And then another very important detail in Mr. Fassbender's recollections, which was the balcony off of his bedroom. So this is on the 2nd story of the row house, the smallest bedroom in the house, which had a small balcony. And for Mr. Fassbender, it was important because it was a spot where he could drag his mattress out in summertime and he could sleep under the stars. And so this detail very much stuck in our minds. And that's the view of the balcony.
We spoke with Ernst Tugendhat, who grew up in the Tugendhat house in Brno, Czech Republic. And he was able to relate a lot of his experiences there. Interestingly, he was forced to leave the house at a fairly young age, and so he doesn't have a lot of memories of the house. He has a few very clear memories, such as playing in the sandbox here in the afternoons and the evenings, and listening for the sound of the car horn, which would signal his father's arrival home from work for the day. His bedroom that he shared with his brother, where they would take their evening meals. And one of the things he related to us was actually he feels, because when they fled, the family was able to take some of the furniture. He actually has a much stronger attachment to the white chair pictured here on the right, for example, than he does to the house itself, because that furniture then traveled with them, and he had the rest of his childhood with the furniture, but not the house. And one of the things that he remembers kind of, or that he feels or thinks in retrospect when he looks back on his childhood, is he had a kind of bemusement that his parents would build or commission such a luxurious and maybe even ostentatious home in Brno. So he had much more to say about his relationship to the house after he left it as an adult, reflecting back on it, than from his time there. But his strongest memories, interestingly, are actually all from the outdoors and from the garden. And there he does have some very vivid memories, which we recount in the book.
So the next chapter is based on the conversation with Mrs. Helga Zumpfer, who grew up in the Schminke house by Sharon. And Mrs. Zumpfer was able to live in the house for much longer. She was 18 when she left, and as a result, she's got much stronger, much fonder memories of her childhood home. It also has to do, we think, because there was a strong relationship that developed between the architect and the family. So there was a connection there, and a very personal relationship.
Just explain quickly.
So this is a booklet that Sharon actually created for the children, and it documents one of his visits to Lubao, and it shows photographs of him and the family and the kids playing in the large pond, and it also includes a poem that he had written. And so it's this memento that she still has and she holds dear as a kind of a symbol or a record of that very strong relationship. So the spaces of the house that were important to her were the playroom. This was a very central space in the house. And the other thing that she recalled very strongly was just the kind of general openness and airiness and kind of a generosity of the spaces of the home. Now, again, speaking as an adult, she said that her favorite space is the winter garden, which we can see is quite special. But the other interesting detail that she talked about is these colored glass portholes that Sharon had placed exactly at a child's eye level in each of the doors leading from the interior to the garden. And Mrs. Zumpfer recalled running from door to door to be able to look at the world through these portholes, and each of the doors had different colors. So she was able to see the world in amber, in violet, in red. And this is a very special memory to her. And then the last chapter, which is the Unité d'Habitation, and the person with whom we were very lucky to speak with was Miss Giselle Moreau. And we're not going to tell her stories because she gets to do that herself. But I'll just flip through a few of the photographs that we took, just to kind of give you a sense of what that chapter looks like.
Yeah, and I can't say how honored we are that she has joined us today, and we're very proud that she'll be able to tell her own story, of course, much better than we could. But we had a really great trip to Marseille and a really nice time we were able to stay in the Unité, which was very nice. And then we had the best possible guide in Giselle that you could hope for. So it's
Maybe
beyond the
before-
book, a very dear memory for us as just people.
And maybe I'll just say that the book also includes a conclusion. And here we tell a little bit about the telling of the story. And I think that's part of, that's a little bit learning from oral history on our part, maybe more so than architectural history, where we are quite honest about who we are and who we're not. So we are designers and we are parents, and we wanted to not only kind of conclude about the places we visited and the people we spoke with, but to kind of underscore the fact that who we are and where we come from and our backgrounds also has an impact in terms of how these stories are told and how they're recorded, and the fact that we had our kid with us on all these throughout all these conversations also played a role maybe in what was said, what wasn't said, and I just want to say that all of the people we spoke with were extremely generous in terms of and tolerant of the fact that that we're not professional interviewers, and we did come with a sometimes cranky baby. And so I think that's the conclusion.
Thank you very much. Before I will let the floor to Giselle to share her own recollection. Maybe I'd like to just to frame not only our personal experience, but also maybe the discussion that will come after. Those places have been built in very different historical condition, and it certainly affect the relationship of people who lived in it to those memories, to their personal memories, and to those places. Two were built in a relatively optimistic time. That was the late 20s and early 30s, namely the house in Weissenhof Siedlung and Villa Tugendhat. Although they had very different, they belong to very different typology of places, of houses. One that was more like also a social estate and project, and another one that was commissioned by a relatively well-off couple directly to Mies van der Rohe. And we noticed in your book the different relations of those people depending on the fate, historical fate of those houses. While the house of Wood in Leubau was built the year when the Nazis took over power in Germany. And again, very different historical setting for the Unité d'Habitation, which is a post-war reconstruction building. So with a new sense of optimism, and also the largest place by far of those you've documented, because it has been home to over 1,500 people, a bit less nowadays because people love it so much that they stay in it. And here I will give the floor to Giselle. But also I wanted to make this note about the historical context, which is very, very pregnant, very, very salient in your book. Giselle, that's it.
Yes, well, as you know, what's a bit special about me is that I arrived here as a very young girl. I was 10, and 68 years later, I'm still here. So that makes me very special. I haven't lived here all my life, but most of my life. And I remember what you said about children, the relationship between the way of living, what was offered them, and the way they experienced it. I could tell you about this, but what is interesting through my own experience is that I have seen my own children and also my own grandchildren live in this building. And I think they enjoyed it nearly or pretty nearly as much as I did, and in the same way, which is for me a proof that it was a success. And anyway, you know that what was very new for the time was having a nursery school inside the building that was designed exactly for little children. Everything was adequate. Everything had been calculated for children. And at the time, I think it was unique. And their playground was the rooftop. Can you imagine a playground in the sky? I mean, it was unique, and I think it still is unique. Well, I can tell you one of my daughters who lives in Marseille nearby, she keeps saying, Le Corbusier, l'unité d'habitation, la Cité Radieuse, c'est le paradis des enfants. It's paradise for children. So you see, throughout the decades, I think we children reacted in the same way. So that's important to me. I don't know if you have questions, because
I don't know if Julia or Corinne want to step in, otherwise I do have some questions. Please go ahead if you wish. Nope.
I mean, I think one of the things that struck us a lot in the conversation with you, Giselle, was the kind of social aspect of the building. The fact that it really feels like a neighborhood, and it did so when you were a child, I think, and it still does.
Yes.
And so this was a little bit the idealism of the building, but in conversations with you, maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yes, as I told you, I spent most of my life here in all the stages of my life, being a child, a teenager, an adult, a young mother, a grandmother. Well, going back to my teenage, at the time, no blocks, no big unité like this one. So I immediately was part of a gang of children, which was unique. And I always felt sorry for all the other kids in my school who were just by themselves in their beautiful homes and big gardens, but by themselves. And I was in a huge group of children, then teenagers. Then as a young mother, I also got acquainted with young women my age who had children of the same age. And we also made groups and we had parties. You know, it was peace and love time. So we all took the children, put them in the children's bedrooms, sat down on the floor, no furniture, of course, just big cushions. And we talked about the world, about how to live, and, you know, all the philosophical and metaphysical subjects. And so it was one of the favorite periods, I think, for me. And then being a young mother was very easy too. I was a teacher, so I worked, and it was a nice place to come back in the evening, a quiet place with all the conveniences, you know, for everybody. And at the time, there were shops inside the buildings, you know. We could do everything inside, which was a danger sometimes. I probably told you, I don't know if you remember. I was very happy as an adult here, but I remember my mother, who didn't have a lot of money, ended not leaving the building. She took my brothers to school, the elevator, then she shot inside the building. She went down in the park for my brothers, you know, and then back home. And in fact, I think she got a little depressed being, you know, closed in, but yet she was a fan of Le Corbusier and she never allowed anybody to criticize Le Corbusier. So you see, it didn't change his view.
You actually spoke about your time as a young mother and a bit later on as well, in over the 70s and so on, but you actually arrived here in 1953. You were 10 years old, if I'm correct, and in the book it is written that you actually met one of your best friend who had moved inside the building the day before you and was happen to live in front of your own flat. So tell us a little bit about your own childhood here before you get your own children.
Well, when I think of it, I spent most of my life here. Well, of course, I went to school. I was in first grade in college, junior high school. And I had my friends at school, but that was separate. I came back home and I had my life here with all my friends here. And I remember at the time we had a phone system that was free, and we could phone each other inside the building for free. At the time, it was big business, you know, because phoning was expensive at the time. And so something that was very funny, we just sat, Maxime was telling you about my friend. She lived opposite me, but we sat in the hall of our apartment and we kept phoning each other. We were a few meters apart, but it didn't matter. Well, today it looks ordinary with the mobiles. Everybody does this. But at the time, it was very, very unusual. And as we had no television in the 50s, no television, what did we do? We talked, we played with the boys, with the girls, chatted a lot, we read a lot, ordinary lives, but I remember I was very happy. I found everything I needed here, and I just love the roof. That's my favorite place. I've used it all my life. I've sunbathed when I was a teenager and a young mother. I've looked after my younger brothers, my children, my grandchildren. Now I use it for picnics in the evening, and lots of people do so. And I mean, whenever we do this, we say how lucky we are. What a wonderful place this is. Can you imagine, nearly 70 years later, I keep thinking how different it is and how lucky I am after all. That was not my childhood, that was my whole life.
Actually, when you speak, Giselle, and having read the book, mind, there are some commonalities. I don't know what you will think, Corinne and Julia, about it, but with the personal memories also of Rolf Fassbender in Weissenhof-Siedlung. A bit different because it's a more horizontal structure. So it was not inside a vertical village. It was actually an horizontal one, but definitely the same sense of the connection between the indoor and the outdoor, the immediate vicinity to a number of children, very happy memories as well in Schimke House, but more reduced to the family circle, with the intervention and the friendship built with the architect Hans Scharoun, which is quite original as well. How would you, and I'm turning to the authors, what is your perception about it, about this different type of childhood spent in those places and the relation it has to their very properties, characteristics, as some of those that Giselle just mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you pick up on that. It really, and maybe my prompt earlier was, questioning the unité d'habitation as a social space, right? The kind of neighborhood in a building, and then the neighborhood of the Weissenhof-Siedlung, and thinking about how children claim space. So for Mr. Fassbender, claiming the street as the playground, also claiming the stairwells of the Mies van der Rohe building next door as a place where they would, run around and play hide and seek, but also do some more naughty things like
setting off
firecrackers and other things that probably they weren't supposed to do. But yet it was a kind of a space that the children claimed. And similarly, Giselle had described to us how in the Unité that there's the interior streets, but those weren't actually meant to be played in. but rather the stairwells were the space for playing, the space that the children kind of found their freedom, and maybe weren't bothered so much by the adults. And so there's even a kind of a very specific relationship between those two stories, even though one is in a kind of horizontal neighborhood, the other is in a vertical neighborhood. At the same time, I think, and then there's a lot of, both of the stories are very positive to those spaces. And we also want to be very cautious to not say that one's childhood entirely depends on the setting where one grows up. I could imagine each of our, the people we spoke with could have easily had very happy childhoods elsewhere. It just happens that that maybe some of the spaces that they found in their settings, in their homes, and I mean that broadly, right? Not just the home, but the neighborhood, lent themselves to certain freedoms, certain forms of play, certain adventures.
What I find striking in the memories of Giselle and the specifics of the building that you point out is that many are still very much valid, not only for yourself, having lived all your life, most of your life here, but also for the children of nowadays who still enjoy it very much. Although maybe the community of children is not as numerous as it used to be, although it's no longer a primary school on the 8th floor, but kindergarten, a nursery school, maternity school, it is still being called in France. But still, they still do like it very much. Teenagers do like it very much as well, for this sense of privacy, the possibility to hide while not being outside, which is very convenient. And the staircase, I do confirm, are still very much a place to hide and seek and where to do nasty things as well. Maybe not fireworks, but that would be too dangerous. But smoking illegal substances and whatever, this is still very much the case. So it has not changed much, right?
No,
I'm turning to Giselle.
No. I think teenagers are really nice, apparently. Little kids, a little noisy sometimes. We were talking about the streets, les rues. No, when I was young, nobody ever dared play in the streets, which is not the case today. On the first and second floor, I wonder why, but especially on the first floor, lots of little kids play and eventually make noise and might disturb people. Well, they shouldn't. It's in the rules of the building, but younger parents maybe don't always care about the rules. Well, anyway, we don't complain.
Actually, this is maybe also connected to the evolution of the usages of this building, that you're right. If something has changed, I don't have the background enough to, I've been living here only for a few years, but it seems to me that the common spaces are maybe not as much used as they used to be. The rooftop or part of it still is, but is that like spatial rooms for playing ping pong or of course the library or the cine club, are they still much used by the community?
Well, as I often say, of course, at the very beginning, the unity was exactly as Le Corbusier had dreamed it would be. I remember my parents, my father immediately belonged to the association, to a drama group, and most people really lived that sort of community life, which is not the case. But now there are enough people to keep Le Corbusier spirit. I wouldn't say, if I have to give a figure, between 50 and 100 people out of 1,000 really play the game, I would say, which is enough to be special and to have a soul, you know. as I often say, it's not as good as it used to be, but it's better than anywhere else. Because it's up to us. If we want to organize things, we have all the elements to do so. It depends on the inhabitants, really, really. And as Maxime said, we still have that cine club, the library, we have exhibitions with openings where people enjoy meeting. And I mean, we could do better. We will do better, I'm sure. But anyway, Le Corbusier is alive. It's always been alive, and it will never end, I'm sure.
Actually, while speaking, while talking, we are surrounded by pieces of art waiting for being unpacked for the next exhibition. So we are really very much in the middle of it, by the way.
That was a good transition.
Indeed. I don't know if Corinne and Julia want to react about this particular recollection, or maybe to frame it in the broader context of the book, and maybe introducing a little bit the other side of the stories as well, by Ernst Tugendhat, for instance, who, as you briefly mentioned earlier, was forced with his family to leave the house at the end of the 1930s. When Czechoslovakia was occupied by Nazi forces, and this very much affected not only cut the relation to the place, the geographical place, but also very much affected his perception of this lost home long after. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about it as well?
I mean, I don't want to draw the kind of direct relationship that because of the move, and he never did himself in terms of the conversation that we had with him, that because they were forced to flee, that he has certain feelings or doesn't have certain feelings towards the house itself. But I think it's certainly the longer one can stay in a place, the longer one has to, to develop those relationships, to develop those experiences, to have a stronger connection to a place. And he was denied that, right, because of the kind of forces of history. So I don't think it's a causal relationship necessarily, but the two facts stand, that out of the people we spoke with, and we always acknowledge that this is not a kind of a scientific study, right? We have a sample size of 4 here, which were all very kind of unique and individual stories, and we celebrate the fact that they're kind of individual and unique. But out of these 4 stories, Mr. Tugendhat was definitely the least connected to the house, the least connected to the place where he grew up, and I think that that is just a factor of many things. Yeah, I mean, I think that we certainly Ms. Moreau, Giselle, and Helga Zumpfe are the 2 who had the longest time in their childhood homes. Mr. Fassbender also in 1938 was the family relocated, as did all the families in the Weissenhof.
And there is maybe also another connection between those 2 particular stories. So the Schminke house and Le Corbusier housing unit. It's the specific relationship also of the architect himself to the place. So in one case, in Schminke house, it's a personal friendship being built with a family, and there are like very lovely pictures, and you also showed this Leporello, this accordion book, that remind that that it was an architect visiting the place he had built, and reading stories in the evening to the children who were growing up in that house. But in the case of Le Corbusier, although it was not such a personal relation, the housing unit in Marseille being the first was occupying also a very specific place in his own past as an architect, and he had a very long correspondence with the director of the primary school.
Not primary. Nursery.
Nursery, also
never
at the
been
time,
primary.
never been. Yeah, you're right. And part of the experiences you wanted to hear about the building were those of the children, how it was being used, and then so on. Maybe Giselle has something to tell about it.
Oh, I think I met him once at the very beginning, but really I was 10 years old and I didn't understand how important he was. But even though I never really met him physically, I consider him as a friend. It's something very personal. When I hear Le Corbusier, I told you, I imagine people are talking about me. And it happened to me in foreign countries several times. Le Corbusier are around, and I imagine they're talking about me. I mean, my father had really a great admiration for him, and he has been very important in our family. One of my friends says, I do not inhabit Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier inhabits me. Maybe it's a little strong, but he really part of us, a certain number of us, of course. I wouldn't say everybody.
And I must confirm that this is something that's a feeling that you do not need a few decades spent in the building to start feeling. Actually, it's confusion between the name of the architect and part of your personal life. This is a building that swallows you very quickly. And
is that negative or what?
No, it's not negative. But it can be like becomes very quickly a considerable part of your life, and it's also something maybe special that. Being a large community with a number of people inside, and also I do completely agree with Giselle about the numbers, the figures about like 10% or less of the community truly playing the game, let's say. It's enough, as she said, for being each of us nearly modernist interpreters, talking to the tens of thousands of visitors coming in normal times. And it's pretty different from place like Villa Tugendhat, for instance, which is completely open to the public and hosts a number of fascinating events, and will continue to do so, but which is not inhabited. Then maybe this is something you felt as well while.
And there's a similarity there too with the Weissenhofsiedlung. So while Mr. Fassbender he met us in the Weissenhofsiedlung, and we were actually able to have our conversation in the row house, not his row house, but the same row house. There's something very interesting about the Weissenhofsiedlung being both a museum and a place where people still live. And that's the same for the Unité. It's both a place of heritage, place of history, but it's also a place where people live. And I think that gives a certain richness to the experience, you know, for those of us who don't have that privilege of living in this heritage. One experiences it differently than one does the Tugendhat house, for example, which has recently been restored immaculately, but yet it is a very kind of sterile place because it doesn't have the life of the inhabitants in it. The Schminke house is interesting because it's somewhere in between, right? It's a museum, but yet one gets to spend the night, right? And so there's this kind of strange, at least for us, it was an interesting and strange ability to understand the house just a little bit differently by being able to, to be by ourselves in that space. But this idea of how do you preserve a building by keeping it immaculate? That's one version. Or do you preserve a building by continuing to live in it in different ways? I think that's another version of preservation.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's very clear when you listen to Giselle speak that if you would take the Unité and freeze it as a museum, you couldn't preserve actually what is the most wonderful part of it, which is the life and the social relations. And so it would be a folly to ever make it not a place where people live.
Yeah, I would say it will work both ways, that if it will be also frozen in the sense of being a standard co-property, not open to external visitors or potential activities, that will produce rather the same effect. About Villa Tugendhat, what you mentioned, Julia, is true, but at the same time, Villa Tugendhat is the only place, the only building by Mies van der Rohe in Brno, but it's definitely not the only functionalist villa. There are plenty around, and you have a nice Café Era, which is wonderful, a bit more distil, which is very nearby. And many of those villas are very much alive, and many have been also damaged during communist times and or after communist time while being first restored. But they also give a sense of how we could look like and offer an interesting contrast with the state of preservation, the historical significance of Villa Tugendhat, but also with the fact that it is more a museum and a place to visit and to organize, to host exhibition and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, no question, we visited, so we visited the Tugendhat villa first as students, actually, back in 2003 or something. And only because it's a museum. I mean, we were the sort of typical architecture student tourists. We would have hopped the fence and like run through the garden.
We didn't do that.
We didn't do that. No, but because it's a museum, as students, we could go inside and see things that we'd only learned in history class in real life. And that's invaluable in its own way, but only functions because it's a museum.
Yes.
So it's not to say that there's a right way or a wrong way to preserve architecture, but that there's many ways, and maybe depending on the building, some ways make much more sense than others. So your building, for example, I mean, I hope it's always that people live there, because that's the only way you could preserve the life of that building, which seems to be the magic of the building, much more than just the concrete and the materials.
I like the way you said your building. We own it.
Yeah,
it's ours.
It is your building.
Yeah, definitely. Some own it more than others.
Some own it and some earn it.
Exactly, and some just live in it. Since we are a small group, but we have the chance to have on board a few people really working on interpreting modernist architecture from different perspectives. So I would like to give them a chance to step in and to switch on their video or their mic or both if they like. And I'm thinking of, for instance, Inge Vaikla, who is a filmmaker and a visual artist from Estonia. It looks very much like Estonia behind you, Ingel, by the way. It is. And Ingel, maybe I will let you introduce a bit your practice, but we met not long ago at the housing unit. You came for a program of screening about modernist architecture, and your work is very much built around this type of architecture and the relation of people who live in it and work in it to those walls. So maybe you can tell a little bit about it.
Thank you, Maxime. Yeah, sorry, nothing modernist here. It's an old farm, Estonian farmhouse, and there's hardly any connection, so I hope you still hear me. But thank you, Corinne and Julia. I really find your practice super interesting, and also the introduction you gave to your other activities before the book. And indeed, this is exactly my weak spot. I'm really curious how inhabitants of the buildings really experience the space once the architect has left in the site. So I was really enchanted by your approach to Keats and also the approach or the concept of the book. And I can't really wait to hold this book in my hands and actually to give it also to my mother as a birthday present. So the plans have been made already. But I'm not going to go too much into my own practice. That would maybe shift a bit too much on the side. But I had a question actually to ask about how do you feel? How did your approach towards like more your architect approach towards designing spaces for kids, let's say, before and after the project about the book? And first I wanted to ask, what was your kind of methodology before when you were designing or designing spaces while keeping kids in mind? Like what kind of research were you making to reach that these meaningful experiences for kids, and did it change after you worked on the book project, or did your perception on this change?
Thank you very much. So I let
Thank you for that question.
Corinne and Julia.
Well, I think it's actually a little bit misleading the way we presented it today. What happened actually with, and maybe just to, the Growing Up Modern project has been extremely influential to us as designers. I think the way we presented our work today, we showed the design work and then we showed the book.
Mm-hmm.
But in many ways, I think the book not as a physical book, but the book as conversations came before all of the design work that we showed today.
Yeah.
In fact, while we did the interviews for the book, we were driving around in a camper van to be able to both visit all the people and then visit their houses. And
keep our sanity with an 8-month-old.
Yes, and so during that trip is actually when we found out we had the commission for the house that we showed you today. And so in a way, the house came after the stories, and I think that was the thing that really shifted our focus. And made us really, think about people in a different way. One is always thinking about clients, but that kind of emphasis on the child as an equal client was something that came out of having conversations with Giselle and the other people we spoke with.
Yeah, it was extremely direct. The young family with the daughter approached us, and our first conversation around the campfire afterward was like, so the daughter is the client, and there's 3 clients, not the parents, and so it followed from that. But this also all happened in a chronological sense at the very beginning of our office. So the way that Julia says, all the work, the design work we showed, came after we started the research for the book, is the way then that our practice has evolved. Only after that. Before that, we were working as architects in offices for other people. So we were, learning how to design from them and having to kind of do that dance of designing in the shoes of the person you're working for. But all of our opportunity to design on our own as ourselves has kind of very directly been informed from the book, because it was sort of maybe the first project that we had after deciding to start our own office.
And maybe something to say also is just I don't remember being taught to focus on people in design. This sounds horrible, but this is there are many things that one is taught to focus on in architecture school. But really thinking about the people who are going to inhabit in various ways the spaces you design is not necessarily one of them, as much as potentially it should be. And so one of the things that was very interesting for us, for example, looking through the archival information on the Unité building, was that Corbusier did draw like little pictures of where different sized people would be, referring to the different ages in the different rooms. That was thought through, much more so than I think we learned about it. And I think since these conversations, since the book, we've taken it much more seriously, and as educators ourselves, we're trying to promote it for our students to do so equally.
Yeah, because it's not only influencing actually your practice as designers. I mean, it's like a feedback loop, but it's also influencing your reflection on alternative forms of architecture interpretation. and therefore preservation, because it's part of it. And there are also in this small virtual rooms, there are people with a very different practice to that regard. We heard about Engel and films as visual journeys are part also of this effort of interpretation of and preservation beyond patrimonialism. But also other forms also are part of it. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Zuzanna Gadomska, who is from a very modernist city, which is Gdańsk in Poland, and who has developed a practice around graphic design, very much important in this country in particular, and in particular in relation to communicating about architectural patrimony from interwar and post-war periods to larger audiences, and specifically to the youth and to new generation. So I don't know if those people like Susanna or like Hania from Weissenhofsiedlung Museum, if they want to pose any question or to share about their own practice in relation to those topics, they are absolutely free to do so or not to do so. Anya, I see you switch on the video.
With
Please
pleasure.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like the lecture today very much, or the discussion, and also to hear Giselle speaking about the Le Corbusier house, because I'm not living in, but I'm working in a Le Corbusier house, because the Weissenhof Museum is in the two-family house of Le Corbusier. And I can say I share the feelings, feeling near to the architect, and also to be very happy to have the chance to be in such a house. So it's not necessary to live in, but to have much time in such a building, perhaps. And yeah, what I like very much, to become clear today in the evening again, that it's, so if you talk with people living in the house, and I think especially with children, you can learn very much about the character of the architecture, and also about the possibilities architecture offer to the people living there, and how it touches the people. So yeah, and yeah, I like it very much. Yeah, and a question, perhaps a bit personal. Are you thinking about how your son experience your own flat and your own architectural surrounding, and what he will tell in 10 or 20 years?
If you have a guess about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny, we couldn't live in a more opposite place. We have a big faux Victorian house from 1910, trying to pretend desperately that it's from 1810 in the funny way.
Made from wood and
yeah.
Yes.
But we have spent the last 2 years sort of, I would say, upgrading our backyard, completely focused around our child, building. He wants a tree fort, but we don't have a tree. So we've made with scaffolding and wood planks, and we've made like a fort, like a vertical fort, like a tree house. And we've just finished a month ago, a big play structure. That's just maybe inspired from the Unité, this great inclined surface.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just made one of those, but out of wood. And we think a lot about it, and we're always aspiring to design our own home one day, if we can ever afford it. And so we very frequently do draw houses that are absolutely kind of rooted in imagining our son Kai and what his experience would be, and what he would think of. And that's all entirely influenced from the study that we did.
But I think maybe the other aspect of it is that because he sees what we do and what we talk about and the materials around the house, he also does, you know, draws his own houses and he's getting his own ideas. And maybe in that way, I think it was interesting for us to not, all the people we talked to for the book, they weren't architects and they didn't have parents as architects. Because there certainly are, you know, there's a set of people who grew up in very interesting houses, maybe not early modernist ones, but very interesting, certainly mid-century modern houses in the US, for example, with parents as architects. And I think that is then a kind of an extra influence. So in some ways, I appreciate that the 4 people who we did speak with weren't architects themselves. And I think we're tainting our own son by, you know, showing him all the stuff we do or the stuff he sees simply around the house.
Actually, I don't know if Giselle has this in mind, but there is also, in a community like the housing unit being larger and home to many people, one of the consequences of the building on the life of people is, for instance, becoming an architect. And there are, I guess, dozens of architects who were born or who grew up in this place, including some who teach at Harvard University. And this is also an evidence which is not necessarily replicable in other places due to the size and degree of achievement of the housing unit in Marseille. But there is also this consequence that might also be noticed. I don't know if anyone from the audience want to maybe to ask a question or a couple of last questions. We are reaching the end of our talk. Maybe Anne from the Architectural League in New York, who is on board. No.
No, thanks. It's just fantastic to see this book realized. It looks absolutely beautiful. And hearing firsthand stories is quite amazing. So thank you for sharing that.
So if there are no more questions, and I think we may close. I don't know if Giselle, if you want to share last word or anything.
Yes, I could repeat endlessly how grateful to Le Corbusier I am for offering a way to people to live together. I think this is more and more important in today's life. People getting together, living together, very important. So I'm very, very grateful to him. That's all.
I think it's a nice conclusion word, and I would like to thank Giselle and Corinne and Julia for joining this conversation. I'm super thrilled that we will keep working together and being in touch on exhibition project in relation to the book, and also it's a nice way for your work to return where it belongs. Which is in those different places, and to be shared with a wider audience, apart from that of the book, among people who still live or work in those places as well. And we will be glad to host it here and to make it visible and available to the community. So thank you very much for your time, for your great way to share. And for our little but qualified audience for staying with us tonight, this evening, and lunchtime, your Eastern Coast time. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Maxime, for both leading the conversation and for making it possible for us to speak with Giselle again. It's a true pleasure.
Thank you. I was very happy.
And for the audience, thank you for being here.
So thank you very much, everyone. And we end up here. And I hope there will be more of this type of conversation in the future. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.